You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood art Ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted Weekly Art History for All Ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today we're looking at Francisco Goya. Now, just a little warning before I get started. This one does have a little bit of sadder content, and the piece we're going to be looking at is The 3rd of May, which tackles themes of war and violence. And if that's something you're not up for learning about today, you might want to check a different episode. Francisco José de Goya y Lucientes was born on March 30th, 1746, in the small village of Fuendentos in the Aragon region of Spain. His father was a gilder, someone who applies a thin layer of gold to things like picture frames and altarpieces. So, from a very young age, Goya was surrounded by art. The family soon moved to the nearby city of Zaragoza, where Goya's artistic education began in earnest. Around the age of 14, he started an apprenticeship with a local painter named José Luzán, where for 4 years he learned the fundamentals of drawing and painting, mostly by copying prints of famous works. Like many ambitious young artists at the time, Goya dreamed of studying in Italy. That was one of the centers of the art world. After failing twice to get into Madrid's Royal Academy of Fine Arts, he decided to fund his own trip. In 1770, he traveled to Rome, where he studied the ancient Roman sculptures and masterpieces of the Renaissance. This trip was crucial for his development, exposing him to different styles and techniques. He even entered a painting competition in the city of Parma, winning second prize for his work. After his return to Spain in 1771, Goya began to get his first major commissions, painting frescoes in churches in Zaragoza. His big break, though, came after he moved to the capital, Madrid. There, he married Josefa Baye, the sister of the influential court painter Francisco Baye. The family connection was huge. Through his brother-in-law, Goya secured a job designing tapestry cartoons for the Royal Tapestry Factory. These weren't funny drawings, though. The cartoons were full-sized, detailed paintings that weavers would use as a guide to create enormous, luxurious tapestries to hang in the royal palaces. For over a decade, Goya designed dozens of these cartoons. They were scenes of leisure and daily life in Madrid, picnics, games, festivals, children playing, things like that. These works are bright, cheerful, and full of life, showing Goya's keen eye for observing the world around him. His talent didn't go unnoticed. He began to receive portrait commissions from the Spanish aristocracy, and in 1786, he was appointed a painter to King Charles III. Just a few years later, under the new king, Charles IV, he reached the pinnacle of his profession, being named first court painter, the most prestigious artistic position in all of Spain. Unfortunately, tragedy struck just at the height of his success. In late 1792, while he was on a trip to southern Spain, Goya fell ill. The exact nature of the illness is still debated by historians. Some suggest it was lead poisoning from his paints, others say a viral infection. Whatever the cause, he was left profoundly and permanently deaf. This marked a dramatic turning point in his life and his art. To suddenly find himself deaf and only able to communicate through writing left Goya feeling isolated. He started to look more inward for inspiration, and his art began to change. While he continued to paint official portraits of the royal family and nobility, his private work became darker and more imaginative too. He started working on a series of etchings called Los Caprichos. The title translates to the caprices, which means sort of whims or fancies. The name suggests that these images are works of imagination, freed from the usual rules of art. By calling them caprices, Goya was signaling a turn towards more personal, inventive kind of art, and it may have offered some protection as well, allowing him to claim these works were just fantasies and not a direct attack on society. Published in 1799, these prints were a biting satire of Spanish society, criticizing everything from the foolishness of the ruling class to superstition and abuses of the church. The most famous image of the series, The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters, shows a sleeping man swarmed by owls and bats, symbolizing what happens when logic and reason are abandoned. Unfortunately, it wasn't just Goya's inner world that was getting darker. The world outside his studio was as well. In 1808, Napoleon Bonaparte's armies invaded Spain, deposing the Spanish king and placing Napoleon's brother Joseph on the throne. This sparked the brutal Peninsular War, a 6-year conflict marked by savage guerrilla warfare and horrific atrocities on both sides. Goya, caught in the middle in Madrid, witnessed these events firsthand. He documented the conflict's inhumanity in a series of etchings, which he called The Fatal Consequences of Spain's Bloody War with Bonaparte. Today, they're known simply as the Disasters of War. These prints are unflinching in their depiction of violence, starvation, and suffering. Unlike previous war artists who glorified generals and heroic charges, Goya focused on the anonymous victims and the complete moral collapse that war brings. He didn't publish them in his lifetime, though. They were just too raw and politically dangerous. They wouldn't be seen by the public until about 35 years after his death. After the war ended and Spain's monarchy was restored, Goya found himself in a difficult position. He had worked for the French court during the occupation, and the new king, Ferdinand VII, was an absolute monarch who cracked down on all liberal thought. Disillusioned by politics and feeling increasingly isolated, Goya just withdrew from public life. In 1819, he bought a country house outside Madrid on the banks of the Manzanares River. The house was known as the Quinta del Sordo, or the House of the Deaf Man. Strangely, though, this wasn't a reference to Goya's deafness. The house had this name before Goya moved in. It was here on the plaster walls of his own dining and sitting rooms that Goya painted his most haunting and mysterious works, known as the Black Paintings. These 14 murals were never meant for public viewing. They're terrifying private visions painted in a palette of black, brown, and gray. They include nightmarish scenes like witches' sabbaths, grim figures floating in the air, and the famous, horrifying image of the god Saturn devouring one of his children. These paintings give us a direct and haunting look into the corners of Goya's mind. Fearing the repressive political climate under Ferdinand VII, Goya left Spain in 1824 at the age of 78. He moved to the city of Bordeaux, France, where many of his liberal-minded friends were already living in exile. Even in this old age, he continued to experiment with new techniques like lithography. He would stay in Bordeaux for the rest of his life until 1828, when he passed away at the age of 82, leaving behind a legacy as one of history's most powerful and uncompromising artists. Now, after a short break, we're going to take a closer look at one of his most famous works, the 3rd of May, 1808. Welcome back. Today we're looking at the 3rd of May, 1808 by Francisco Goya. Painted in 1814, 6 years after the event it depicts, this enormous oil-on-canvas painting stands nearly 9 feet tall and 11 feet wide. It is a monumental and harrowing depiction of the consequences of war. It was commissioned by the Spanish government following the defeat of Napoleon to commemorate the Spanish resistance. It has a companion piece, the 2nd of May, 1808, which shows the chaotic street fighting that broke out in Madrid against the French occupying forces. The 3rd of May shows what happened next. The painting captures the scene in the dead of night, just hours after the uprising. On a barren hill outside the city, a firing squad of French soldiers is executing a group of captured Spanish civilians. To the right, we see the soldiers as a single unified block. They're turned away from us, a faceless, almost mechanical killing machine. Their humanity is hidden by their tall shakos and their rigid, repeating posture. On the ground, between them and their victims, lies a large, square lantern which casts a harsh, dramatic light on the scene. The light falls directly upon the victim to the left. Unlike the uniformed soldiers, the Spaniards are a varied group of individuals reacting in terror, prayer, and defiance. In the foreground is a gruesome pile of executed bodies, contorted in death and soaked in blood. But our eye is drawn to the central figure, a man in a simple bright white shirt and yellow trousers. He's on his knees, his arms flung wide in a gesture of both surrender and appeal. He stares directly at the rifles aimed at him, his face a mask of terror and disbelief. To his side, a monk bows his head in prayer, while another man clenches his fists in rage. The central figure in the white shirt is the undeniable heart of the painting. He's loaded with powerful symbolism. His posture with arms outstretched directly evokes the image of Christ on the cross. Goya even includes a mark on the man's right hand, which resembles a stigmata, the wound from the crucifixion nail. By linking this anonymous civilian to Christ, Goya elevates his death from an execution to a martyrdom. This isn't just one man dying. It's an image of humanity itself being sacrificed. His brilliant white shirt symbolizes innocence, making the brutality of the killing even more potent. For centuries, artists used light or chiaroscuro to create a sense of the divine. Think of the heavenly glow that often surrounds holy figures. Goya's light is different. The lantern on the ground is a modern, man-made object. It doesn't offer divine comfort or salvation. Its harsh and unforgiving glare simply illuminates the horror of the scene. It's the light of truth, revealing the brutal reality of what is happening. No sugarcoating. The light separates the victims from the executioners. The Spanish rebels are bathed in this truth-telling light, while the French soldiers are cloaked in shadow, their dark work hidden from view. The 3rd of May, 1808 is widely considered one of the first truly modern paintings. Before Goya, war art typically glorified the event, focusing on heroic generals, waving flags, and noble sacrifice. Goya completely breaks from this tradition. There are no heroes here in the traditional sense. The action is not a glorious battle, but a cold, systematic execution. He makes the victims, not the victors, the subject of this masterpiece. He strips war of its romance and shows it for what it is: organized, mechanized brutality. And this piece had an immense influence on later artists. The French painter Edouard Manet directly borrowed its composition for his painting, The Execution of Emperor Maximilian. And its spirit lives on in what is perhaps the most famous anti-war painting in the 20th century, Pablo Picasso's Guernica. Picasso's black and white mural depicting the bombing of the Basque town shares Goya's focus on civilian suffering. And Picasso similarly situated a figure, although a female figure, with arms thrown up in a similar gesture of anguish. The 3rd of May, 1808 has become more than just a painting. It's a timeless and universal protest against the horrors of war, forever reminding us of the human cost of conflict. More than 200 years after its creation, the painting is still sadly relevant. The haunting imagery reminding us that violent conflict is ultimately a loss for both sides, as some will lose their lives and others lose their humanity.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.